Lots of finance talk out there today. Producer price indexes and all these fancy words, and I need someone smart to come explain it to me. So joining me now is John Carney. He's the Breitbart News, Finance, and Economics editor. John, producer price index has risen by a record 9.6%. That sounds really bad, but I don't know what those words mean. What's that mean?
So the producer price index is the second version of inflation that the Department of Labor produces. They come out with something called the consumer price index, which you might be familiar with. Sorry about that. And the consumer price index is how much consumers are paying for goods and services. It includes imports. The producer price index is measured instead by asking companies what they're getting paid. So it doesn't include imports because we don't ask the foreign companies. It does include exports. And it actually allows us to look deeper into the economy because we're not just measuring what consumers are paying for things, but what businesses are paying other things for the goods and services they're buying. So like let's say a car maker buys parts from a third-party car auto part maker, then we get to measure that in the producer price index.
Okay, so this sounds like a long, fancy way of saying costs of the goods businesses are buying are going up.
That's right. So it's gone up by 9.6%, which is much more than anybody expected. And if you look further into the numbers, it's going up by even more than that. In fact, a category called processed goods for intermediate demand is up 26.5%. So that's everything that goes through some process and is sold to another business before it gets sold on to consumers is up 26.5%.
Okay, so what does this mean for me, John? I don't run an auto parts place. I don't own a tire dealership somewhere. What's it mean for Joe Schmo?
Well, so the 9.6% is you, because that's what they call final demand. So that's it getting to the final users of these things. And so what that means is we're all paying higher prices. Now, we knew this. Last week, we got the CPI number. That was running very high. One of the things that seems to be happening, though, is that inflation is accelerating. We were told earlier in the year, and you and I have talked about this before, that they said inflation was going to be transitory, that the numbers were going to come down as we went into year end. And, supposedly supply chain problems were going to clear up and demand was going to shift to services. Well, we have seen demand shift to services, but that just drove inflation up in services as well. And we're not seeing any cooling off in inflation. Those numbers I talked about, the intermediate demand numbers, that actually is probably an indication that there's more inflation ahead. There's inflation in the production system that is going to come down and get the consumer in the future. It's not going away anytime soon.
John, I have tried to explain to people before, while Joe Biden has obviously made everything much, much worse, if you're mad about inflation, I mean, you should be yelling about, honestly, the last 2 or 3 years of trillion-dollar bill and trillion-dollar bill and trillion-dollar bill and printing trillions in unbacked currency and just chucking it into the market. What you're seeing now is not a result of what we're doing. It's a result of what we've done.
That's right. This is right now, the inflation we're experiencing is because we poured money into the economy when the pandemic happened. We said, uh-oh. In some ways, we were fighting the last war. After the great financial crisis, we saw really that demand stayed very low and unemployment stayed very high for a long time. So this time, policymakers pretty much reacted as they wish they acted back in 2009, 2010. They poured money into the economy. The problem was we didn't have that kind of economic crisis. And in fact, once we started to reopen the economy, demand surged much higher, and pouring money was like pouring kerosene onto a fire. We were probably already going to get inflation just from this sudden stop and start of the economy. When we poured a lot of extra demand there, it made it far, far worse.
All right, John, I'm going to play a little clip. I'm sure you've seen it about 10,000 times of CNBC's Jim Cramer, and I'm confused.
Right, first of all, to me, we have the strongest economy perhaps I have ever seen. See that number this morning, the unemployment number? It's the best in years, not best in 69. We have all spotted the endless help wanted signs, the housing and apartment shortages, the tremendous demand for goods and services, a marvel to behold. Oh, people are confident about their jobs. I say fantastic. and the ability to even get better ones if they want to. They're spending more than I've ever seen, but they're doing it with cash, not on credit. They're doing so in a roaring 20s style.
All right, John. No, I'm certainly not an economist. I don't have a financial show, but none of that seems to be ringing true to me. Is he right?
No, he's not right. Look, I used to work with Jim. We're friends, actually. He is doing exactly what I was saying. He's addressing the problems of the last economic crisis instead of the problems of this economic crisis. In fact, the surveys show that people aren't concerned about employment right now. They knew jobs were going to come back when we reopened the economy. We didn't have an economic crisis brewing before the pandemic hit. In fact, the economy was doing very well. So when you take off the restrictions, when people start to no longer be as afraid of getting infected, of course jobs start to come back. So Cramer's talking about that, and he's right. Jobs are doing pretty well, but that's not the problem in the economy. The problem is people are falling behind because even if you have a job, even if you've gotten a raise, you're probably paying more for the goods and services you're using than your raise. So people who are getting really record high raises, if you got a 5% raise, you're still 1.9% under because inflation is running so high.